Las hermanas Apache suplicaron, de llanos entrar o morirmos en la nieve. The snow had begun falling early that morning, soft at first, but soon it turned into thick, heavy flakes that blanketed the mountains in white. The wind howled through the trees, bending them under its icy weight, and the sisters, Maria and Lela, struggled against it with every step. They had been walking for hours, maybe even days, and the cold had seeped into their bones. Their small cloaks, patched many times over, offered little protection, and their boots were thin, soaked through from the snow. Each step was a struggle, and every gust of wind threatened to knock them down. Maria, the older sister, tried to keep her spirits strong. She took Lela's hand and whispered, "We have to keep moving. We cannot stop. If we stop, the snow will take us." Lela, shivering violently, nodded, though tears ran down her cheeks from the cold and fear. The mountains were beautiful, with their towering pines and sparkling white snow, but that beauty felt cruel in the face of their struggle. The sisters had been separated from their family during a raid months ago, and since then, every day had been a fight for survival. Food was scarce, and their bodies ached constantly. Hunger gnawed at them, and exhaustion weighed them down more heavily than the snow on their shoulders. As the day grew longer, the sisters looked for signs of life, smoke from a distant chimney, tracks in the snow, but there was nothing. The mountains seemed empty, as though the world had frozen completely. They had survived by relying on their wits, climbing trees for shelter, catching small animals and melting snow for water, but this storm was different. It was relentless, fierce, and unforgiving. Each step forward felt like a battle. Maria encouraged Lela, "Just a little further, sister. I see a ridge ahead. Maybe we can find shelter there." Lela nodded again, clinging to hope. The cold was more than just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Their fingers and toes were numb, and the sisters knew that frostbite could set in if they did not find warmth soon. Their faces were red and cracked from the biting wind, and their breath came in heavy, misty clouds. Every sound, the wind, the cracking of ice, the distant howl of an animal, was amplified in the silence of the mountains. The sisters felt small and fragile in a world that had suddenly become vast and threatening. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. It was hard to tell in the white blur around them. Maria scanned the horizon constantly, looking for anything that could help them survive. Then, far in the distance, a shape appeared through the snow. A small cabin stood alone, smoke curling from its chimney. The sight of it brought a spark of hope to both sisters. They had seen cabins before, but in their desperation, this one seemed like a gift from the heavens. They moved toward it, but the snow was deep, and each step was heavier than the last. Lela stumbled, almost falling face first into the snow, and Maria caught her quickly. "Careful, sister. We are almost there. Just a little more," she said, her voice firm but gentle. The cabin grew larger as they approached, and with it, the sisters' hearts beat faster. The warmth inside could mean survival. It could mean the difference between life and death. When they finally reached the cabin, Maria and Lela knocked on the door. Their knuckles were raw and red from the cold, and the sound seemed almost swallowed by the storm. They knocked again, louder this time, their voices cracking as they shouted, "Please, let us in. We will die in the snow." Their words were desperate, almost pleading, and they waited, shivering, hoping someone would hear. Inside the cabin, a family huddled near the fire. John and Mary, along with their young son Samuel, were startled by the sudden pounding on the door. The storm outside made everything feel more urgent, and they wondered who could possibly be out in such weather. John opened the door cautiously, peering out into the white blur. He could barely make out two figures, small and hunched, clearly shivering. When he realized they were young girls, his heart clenched. The sisters tried to explain through their chattering teeth, "Please, sir, please, we will die. The snow, the wind, let us in." Their voices were weak but full of fear. Maria's eyes were wide with terror and Lela's lips were blue. The sight was enough to move even the most cautious person. John hesitated. He knew the world was dangerous, that strangers could bring trouble, but he also knew he could not turn them away to die in the snow. Mary came closer to the door, holding Samuel close. She looked at the sisters and saw the desperation in their eyes. Without a word, she nodded to John. He stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The girls stumbled into the cabin, collapsing near the fire. The warmth hit them instantly, melting some of the ice that had formed on their clothes and hair. Mary quickly wrapped them in thick blankets while John brought hot water to drink. The sisters' teeth still chattered and their hands shook violently, but the fire and the blankets slowly began to bring color back to their faces. For a few moments, silence filled the cabin. The storm outside continued its furious howl, but inside there was warmth and safety. Maria and Lela could feel their strength returning, if only slightly. They huddled close to the fire, drinking the warm water and feeling it run through their bodies like magic. Lela leaned against Maria, her small body trembling, and whispered, thank you for saving us." Maria squeezed her hand, tears glistening in her eyes, but she too whispered, "We are safe for now, sister, safe for now." The family watched them carefully, unsure how to act. Trust had to be built slowly. They offered food, a small stew that was hot and fragrant. The sisters ate hungrily, though carefully, and with every bite they regained some energy. Maria spoke softly to the family, explaining that they had been traveling alone for weeks, searching for their home and their family, and that the storm had caught them unprepared. Her voice was calm but laced with fear. Lela remained quiet, still absorbing the warmth and safety of the cabin. Outside, the storm raged on, burying the world in snow. But inside, the sisters began to feel something they had not felt in a long time: hope. They knew this shelter was only temporary, that they would need to continue their journey soon, but for the first time, they could rest. Maria glanced at the family and realized how small acts of kindness could make the difference between life and death. She thought about the nights spent alone in the cold, and how this one moment of compassion had saved them both. As the evening fell, the wind outside howled louder, but the sisters no longer felt the same fear. They wrapped themselves in blankets, sitting close to the fire, and slowly drifted into a light sleep. Their journey was far from over, and challenges would continue, but for now, they were safe. They had survived the snow, survived the cold, and found warmth in the kindness of strangers. Maria and Lela had been desperate and fearful, but their courage had led them here. They had asked for help, and someone had listened. The night stretched on, quiet except for the crackling fire and the storm outside. The sisters slept, dreaming of the journey ahead, of the family they hoped to find, and of a world that, despite its dangers, still held people capable of compassion. The first part of their story ended not in tragedy, but in survival, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, hope and human kindness could prevail. The sisters woke the next morning to a world still white and silent. The storm had slowed, but snow still fell gently, covering the landscape in a soft blanket. Inside the cabin, the fire was warm and steady, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Maria stretched her stiff arms and looked around, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety. They were safe for now, but they still had no idea what lay ahead. Lela sat on a wooden chair, rubbing her hands together to bring back some feeling. The warmth of the fire was comforting, but the fear of the unknown still lingered in her heart. Mary, the settler woman, moved quietly around the small kitchen, preparing breakfast. She had noticed the sisters' exhaustion and knew that food would help them regain strength. The smell of hot porridge and baked bread filled the cabin, and Maria and Lela's stomachs rumbled. They had not eaten a proper meal in days, surviving only on small amounts of dried meat and berries. The sisters looked at each other with grateful eyes and tried to smile, though the chill still clung to their bones. As they ate, John, the settler man, watched them closely. He was cautious but curious. The sisters had come from a different world, one he barely understood. Their clothing, their language, and even their expressions were foreign to him. He had grown up in these mountains, learning to survive through hard work and careful planning. Strangers, especially young ones, could be unpredictable, and he had learned to be careful. Yet, he could not ignore the fear and desperation in their eyes. After breakfast, Maria spoke softly, trying to explain their situation. "We have been traveling for many days. Our family, we were separated during a raid. The snow caught us and we did not know where to go. Please, thank you for helping us. You have saved our lives." Her words were careful, polite, and full of gratitude. Lela nodded quietly, too exhausted to speak, but her eyes shone with the same thankfulness. John nodded slowly, appreciating their honesty. "You are welcome," he said, his voice calm. "It is dangerous out there. You were lucky we were home. But you must understand, it is not safe for strangers to travel alone in these mountains. The snow, the cold, and the wild animals can take anyone." He looked at them seriously. "You are strong, but even the strongest can fall in this weather." The sisters listened carefully, realizing the truth in his words. They had survived many hardships, but this storm had shown them how fragile life could be. Maria's mind raced with questions. Would they ever find their family? How long would it take to recover enough strength to continue? And could they truly trust these strangers? The cabin was warm and safe, but it was also a place of unknowns. They had entered, pleading for help, but now they needed to navigate a delicate balance of trust and caution. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, covering the world in white. The sisters looked through the window, studying the landscape. Trees were heavy with snow, their branches bending under the weight. The mountains rose in the distance, silent and imposing. They remembered their journey, how they had climbed cliffs, crossed frozen streams, and huddled in caves to survive. The snow looked beautiful, almost peaceful, but it was also a reminder of the dangers that had chased them for days. Mary brought them more blankets and encouraged them to rest near the fire. "You need warmth and sleep," she said kindly. "Your bodies have been through a lot." Lela wrapped herself in a thick blanket, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen muscles. Maria sat beside her, holding her sister's hand and feeling her small fingers regain some feeling. They both realized how important it was to recover their strength before continuing. Survival was not just about moving forward, it was about preparing for the journey ahead. As the day passed, the sisters began to regain energy. They helped Mary in small ways, carrying firewood and fetching water from a nearby frozen stream. Their bodies still ached, but every small task reminded them of their resilience. Maria smiled faintly at Lela, whispering, "We are stronger than we think. We will continue." "We must continue." Lela nodded, feeling courage return to her heart. The storm outside had slowed, but they knew the mountains were still dangerous. Every step forward required careful thought, and every decision could be a matter of life or death. The settlers observed the sisters' behavior carefully. They were impressed by the girls' courage, but they also understood the need for caution. Strangers could be unpredictable, and cultural differences sometimes created misunderstandings. John and Mary had learned over the years that trust was earned slowly. The sisters had shown honesty and respect, but the settlers needed to see how they would behave over time. This cautious observation created a quiet tension in the cabin, a mix of warmth, relief, and careful consideration. By afternoon, the storm had almost passed. The sky outside was gray, but the snow had stopped falling. The sisters decided to explore the area around the cabin, walking carefully in the fresh snow. Every step was a challenge, but it was also a chance to feel the ground beneath their feet and reconnect with the world outside the fire. They noticed animal tracks in the snow, reminders that life continued even in the harshest conditions. Maria pointed out a small rabbit track and whispered, "See, life finds a way, so will we." Lela smiled faintly, feeling hope return to her heart. When they returned to the cabin, the sisters found John and Mary preparing for the night. The warmth of the cabin was now familiar, and the sisters felt more comfortable. They shared stories of their journey, describing the mountains, the raids, and the people they had met along the way. The settlers listened with interest, realizing how much courage and resourcefulness the sisters had shown. Maria spoke clearly and honestly, never exaggerating or hiding the truth. Lela added small details, her voice timid but sincere. Through these stories, bonds began to form between the girls and the settlers. As evening fell, the fire burned brightly, casting shadows on the walls. The sisters prepared for sleep, wrapping themselves in blankets once more. Maria held Lela close, whispering encouragement. "We are safe here. We have food, warmth, and people who care. But we must remember, our journey is not over. We must be ready for what comes next." Lela nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and determination. They had survived the storm, but the mountains were vast, and their family was still out there somewhere. The settlers respected the sisters' strength, but they also wanted to ensure their safety. John spoke gently. "You must rest well tonight. Tomorrow, we will help you plan your journey. The snow has made travel dangerous, and you will need guidance." Maria nodded gratefully, understanding the wisdom in his words. Lela listened quietly, feeling trust grow in her heart. The strangers who had once seemed uncertain were now allies, helping them prepare for the challenges ahead. As the night deepened, the sisters fell asleep near the fire. Their dreams were filled with memories of the journey, the fear of the storm, and the hope for the future. The warmth of the cabin surrounded them, and for the first time in days they felt safe. The mountains outside remained cold and unforgiving, but inside there was comfort, trust, and the promise of survival. Maria and Lela knew that their story was only beginning, but they also realized the importance of kindness, trust, and courage. The night passed quietly, with the fire crackling and the wind howling softly in the distance. The sisters slept deeply, recovering from the harsh journey. They would wake tomorrow stronger, ready to continue, but for now they allowed themselves to rest. Part of surviving, they knew, was recognizing when to stop and regain strength. They had pleaded for help, and help had come. They had survived the snow and the storm, and they had learned the power of trust and human kindness. The morning would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new hope. Maria and Lela had survived the cold, survived the hunger, and survived the fear. They had learned that even strangers could become allies, and that courage and honesty could open doors in the most desperate times. As they slept, the fire continued to burn, a symbol of warmth, safety, and the promise of another day. The next morning, the cabin was filled with a quiet calm. The storm had passed completely, and the sky outside was a pale blue, though snow still covered the mountains and trees like a thick blanket. Maria and Lela woke slowly, stretching their stiff muscles and rubbing their frozen hands together. The warmth from the fire and blankets had restored some of their strength, but their bodies still ached from days of traveling through the snow. Despite the discomfort, they felt hope. The warmth of the cabin, the presence of the settlers, and the taste of a proper meal the day before had reminded them that survival was possible. Mary was already in the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast of eggs and bread. She had noticed how exhausted the sisters were and wanted them to have a good start to the day. Maria and Lela quietly moved to the fire, letting it thaw their fingers before joining her. The sisters were still cautious. They had been alone for so long that trusting others felt strange. But they also knew they owed their survival to this family, and that thought gave them a sense of gratitude. While they ate, John looked out the window at the snow-covered mountains. He knew that the storm had made the paths dangerous, and he worried about the sisters traveling alone again. Yet he also understood that they could not stay in the cabin forever. Life in the mountains was harsh, and even kind people had to continue with their daily work. He turned to Maria and said, Once you are ready, you will need to travel through these mountains to find your family. I can give you advice and supplies, but the journey will be difficult. You must be careful." Maria nodded solemnly. She had been preparing for this moment for many days, ever since the sisters had been separated from their family. She had learned to navigate the mountains, find food, and stay alive in harsh conditions. But even with that knowledge, the snowstorm had shown her how vulnerable they were. "We understand," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We are grateful for your help. We will follow your advice and be careful." Lela nodded silently, feeling both nervous and hopeful. After breakfast, the sisters helped the family with chores. They carried firewood, fetched water from a nearby stream, and even helped with the small garden outside the cabin. The work was tiring, but it gave them purpose. They were no longer just survivors. They were contributing to the household that had saved their lives. Maria noticed how the settlers worked together, supporting one another in tasks both small and large. It was a new way of living, one that the sisters had rarely experienced in their own community. They learned quickly, following instructions carefully and asking questions when unsure. As the day went on, Maria and Lela began to share more of their story with the settlers. They spoke of the raid that had separated them from their family, the long and dangerous journey through the mountains, and the many nights they had spent cold and alone. John and Mary listened carefully, sometimes speaking words of comfort, sometimes silently observing. Samuel, the young boy, sat quietly beside the fire, wide-eyed at the tales of survival and courage. The sisters' words painted vivid pictures of their hardships, and their honesty and bravery inspired admiration. Maria explained how they had learned to hunt small animals, gather edible plants, and find clean water even in harsh conditions. She spoke of the fear they had felt during storms and the courage it took to keep moving despite exhaustion. Lela added her own experiences, sharing moments of hope and fear, laughter and tears. The settlers realized how resilient the sisters were. They had faced dangers that most people could not imagine, yet they remained kind and respectful. The bond between the sisters and the family began to grow, built on trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. In the afternoon, John suggested that they take a short walk outside to examine the paths the sisters would need to follow when they continued their journey. Maria and Lela wrapped themselves in thick cloaks, and together with John and Samuel, they stepped into the snow. The air was crisp and cold, and the snow sparkled in the sunlight. Every step left deep footprints, and the sisters had to move carefully to avoid slipping. The mountains looked peaceful, almost magical, but Maria knew they could be dangerous. Hidden crevices, thin ice, and sudden drops could easily turn a journey into a tragedy. John pointed out safer paths and hidden dangers. He taught the sisters how to read the tracks in the snow, how to find signs of animals, and how to choose routes that would be less risky. Maria listened intently, absorbing every word. She knew that knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. Lela, though younger, was eager to learn as well. She watched John's demonstrations carefully, memorizing every detail. The sisters realized that even in unfamiliar territory, careful observation and preparation could provide safety and confidence. When they returned to the cabin, the sisters helped Mary prepare a warm meal. They chopped vegetables, stirred the stew, and even managed to bake a small loaf of bread under her guidance. Working in the kitchen reminded them of home and family, and the simple act of cooking brought a sense of normalcy. The warmth of the cabin, the smell of food, and the laughter that occasionally filled the room created a moment of peace in a world that had often been harsh and unforgiving. After dinner, as the fire burned brightly, the sisters sat quietly near it, reflecting on the day. Maria took Lela's hand and said, "We have been through so much, sister, but today we have learned that not all strangers are dangerous. Some can help us, guide us, and give us hope." Lela nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. "Yes," she whispered. "We were scared, but we are not alone anymore. That makes a difference." The night grew darker and the sisters prepared for sleep. They wrapped themselves in blankets, feeling the warmth seep into their bones. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees, a reminder that the mountains were still wild and untamed. But inside, there was safety, friendship, and guidance. Maria and Lela knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but they also knew they were stronger when they were not alone. As they drifted off to sleep, Maria thought about the lessons of the day. Trust could be built slowly, through actions and kindness. Courage was not just facing danger, but also asking for help when it was needed. Survival was not only about skill and strength, but also about recognizing and accepting the support of others. Lela's quiet breathing beside her reminded Maria that they were a team, and together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The night passed quietly, with the fire burning steadily and the wind outside keeping its distance. The sisters slept deeply, recovering more strength and energy than they had in weeks. They dreamed not only of their family but also of the future, imagining the day they would finally reunite with loved ones. The warmth of the cabin, the guidance of the settlers, and the hope they now carried created a sense of possibility. For the first time in many days, they believed that they could survive and thrive beyond the storm. The morning would bring new challenges, but it would also bring preparation, learning, and determination. Maria and Lela had faced dangers before, but now they had allies and knowledge to guide them. The settlers had shown them that even in harsh conditions, kindness and trust could exist. And the sisters had learned that asking for help was not a weakness, but a step toward survival. The cabin, with its fire, food, and warmth, became a place of rest, learning, and reflection. Maria and Lela understood that the days ahead would be filled with both challenges and hope. They were ready to face the journey, not just as survivors, but as young women who had experienced fear, hardship, and kindness. They had learned that life was fragile, yet strong, and that courage, trust, and compassion could carry them through even the coldest storms. The sisters slept deeply, surrounded by warmth and care, preparing themselves for the next steps of their journey. Outside, the mountains remained cold and wild, but inside the cabin, a small fire burned steadily, symbolizing safety, hope, and the promise of a new day. Maria and Lela knew that tomorrow they would continue, but for now they rested, knowing that trust, kindness, and courage could make even the harshest journey possible to endure. The following morning, the sisters awoke to a pale, quiet light filtering through the cabin windows. The storm had fully passed, leaving the mountains covered in fresh snow that sparkled in the weak winter sun. Maria and Lela felt the warmth from the fire still lingering in their bodies, but their muscles ached from days of travel and from the small chores they had done the day before. They looked at each other quietly, understanding without words that today would be a day of preparation. They would need to learn as much as possible before continuing their journey. Mary was already in the kitchen, tending to the small stove and humming softly. The aroma of warm bread and cooked vegetables filled the cabin, making the sisters' stomachs growl. Maria and Lela moved toward the fire first, letting its heat chase away the last of their shivers, then joined Mary at the table. As they ate, John entered the cabin with a map carefully rolled in his hands. His expression was serious but kind, and the sisters immediately felt the importance of what he carried. John unrolled the map on the small wooden table. The mountains stretched across it like a frozen sea, with markers for rivers, ridges, and potential hazards. He pointed to several paths and said, "Tomorrow, when you leave, you must follow the safest route. Some trails are covered in snow, others may hide thin ice or hidden cliffs. You must be cautious, step by step, and remember what I have taught you about reading the land." Maria listened carefully, nodding, her eyes scanning the map with concentration. Lela leaned over her sister, absorbing every detail. They both realized that this guidance could mean the difference between life and death. After studying the map, John spoke about potential dangers they might face. Animals like wolves and mountain lions are in these forests. They usually avoid humans, but hunger can drive them closer to cabins and travelers. You must be alert and ready. Fire, noise, and awareness can help you stay safe. Do not wander off paths without caution, and always watch the snow for hidden tracks or holes. The sisters nodded solemnly, understanding that survival required constant attention, even when the landscape seemed calm. The morning passed slowly as the sisters practiced skills that might save their lives. John taught them how to identify animal tracks in the snow, how to find signs of water, and how to notice changes in weather that might indicate another storm. Maria picked up the lessons quickly, her sharp mind noticing small details that others might miss. Lela was more cautious, but she followed instructions carefully and asked questions whenever unsure. Together, they began to understand the hidden patterns of the mountains, gaining confidence in their ability to navigate them. By midday, the sisters helped Mary with chores inside the cabin. They chopped firewood, fetched water, and repaired small items around the house. While doing so, Maria shared more of her story. She spoke about the fear and loneliness they had felt while traveling, and how the snowstorm had made them realize the value of trust. Lela added details of small moments that had kept their hope alive: a frozen stream that provided water, a small cave that offered temporary shelter, and the memory of their family that motivated them to keep moving. John and Mary listened attentively. They admired the courage and resilience of the sisters, realizing how much determination it took for two young girls to survive alone in such harsh conditions. John commented, "You have been brave. Many adults would struggle as much as you have. Your strength is remarkable, but courage alone is not enough. Knowledge, planning, and careful observation are equally important." Maria and Lela understood his words deeply. They knew that while bravery had kept them moving, careful thinking and preparation would keep them alive in the days to come. As the afternoon sunlight dimmed, the sisters and settlers stepped outside to examine the surrounding area. The mountains looked peaceful under the snow, but every step could hide danger. John showed them how to test snow for stability, how to find solid ground, and how to look for signs of animals that might threaten them. Maria and Lela practiced moving carefully, learning how to step lightly and observe the land around them. The cold air was biting, but it also sharpened their senses, keeping them alert. During this time, the sisters began to open their hearts more fully. They asked John about his life in the mountains, about the challenges he and Mary faced, and about the ways they kept safe during harsh winters. John spoke honestly, sharing both hardships and triumphs. Maria and Lela listened intently, realizing that courage was not only about facing the mountains, but also about enduring life's difficulties with patience and wisdom. Lela even laughed softly at a story John told about a mischievous fox, feeling a lightness in her heart she hadn't felt in weeks. As evening approached, the wind outside began to pick up, reminding everyone that the mountains were unpredictable. The sisters returned to the cabin, their cheeks red from the cold but their spirits lifted from the lessons and practice. Mary prepared a warm meal, and the four of them ate together, sharing stories and laughter. The simple act of sharing food and conversation reinforced the sense of connection between them. The sisters realized that survival was not only about reaching safety, but also about building bonds with those who offered help along the way. After dinner, Maria and Lela settled near the fire. The room was quiet except for the crackle of burning wood. Maria took a deep breath and whispered to Lela, "We have learned so much today. The mountains are still dangerous, but we are stronger. We know how to watch, to move carefully, and to survive. We will continue, and we will be ready." Lela nodded, feeling the courage growing in her chest. The warmth of the fire and the presence of the settlers gave her confidence she had not felt in weeks. The night grew darker, and snowflakes began falling gently again, not a storm but a reminder that winter was still in charge of the mountains. The sisters wrapped themselves tightly in blankets and listened to the wind outside. It was a strange comfort, knowing that even as nature remained harsh, they had learned tools to protect themselves. Maria thought about the lessons of trust and caution, of courage and preparation. She realized that survival was about balance, not reckless bravery, but careful, intelligent action combined with faith in those who helped you along the way. Lela, lying beside her sister, reflected on her own feelings. The fear that had gripped her during the storm was still present in small ways, but it had less power now. She felt stronger, more capable, and more aware of the world around her. The lessons from John and Mary had opened her eyes to possibilities she had not considered, ways to move safely, ways to observe the land, and ways to survive even when the mountains seemed impossible. As the fire dwindled to glowing embers, the sisters finally closed their eyes and drifted into sleep. Their dreams were filled not with fear but with hope, images of warm fires, friendly faces, and paths through the mountains where survival was possible. They imagined finding their family, reuniting with loved ones, and telling stories of courage and kindness along the way. The night passed quietly. The storm outside remained mild, and the cabin stayed warm and safe. Maria and Lela slept deeply, allowing their bodies to regain strength and their minds to prepare for the journey ahead. They had learned invaluable lessons that day, lessons of caution, observation, trust, and courage. They had experienced the kindness of strangers and the reassurance that even in the harshest places, survival was possible when hearts and minds worked together. When dawn approached, the sisters would awaken stronger and more confident. They would be ready to face the mountains again, armed not only with skills for survival but also with understanding and trust. The settlers had given them more than warmth and food. They had given them guidance, knowledge, and hope. Maria and Lela knew that the journey ahead would still be dangerous, but they now had tools to navigate it with confidence. As the first light of morning touched the snowy peaks, Maria and Lela held hands, looking at the world outside the cabin. It was cold, unforgiving, and vast, but it was also beautiful, filled with life, lessons, and opportunities. They had survived storms, hunger, and fear. They had found allies and learned skills that would keep them alive. And they had discovered that even in the most difficult moments, hope and courage could shine through, guiding them toward a brighter tomorrow. The night had ended not only with rest but with preparation for what lay ahead. Maria and Lela had strengthened not only their bodies but their minds and spirits. They had learned that survival required more than movement. It required awareness, careful planning, and trust in those who offered help. And in the quiet warmth of the cabin, surrounded by people who had shown them kindness, they knew they could face the challenges of the mountains and continue toward their ultimate goal, finding their family and returning home safely. The next morning, Maria and Lela awoke early, feeling the warmth of the fire and the safety of the cabin surrounding them. The sky outside was bright, and the mountains were sparkling white under the sun. The storm had passed completely, leaving the world silent and still. Maria looked at her sister Lela, who was rubbing her eyes and trying to wake up. Both of them felt stronger, more confident, and ready to face the journey that lay ahead. They knew that the path to their family would still be difficult, but the lessons they had learned and the kindness they had received had prepared them for what was to come. Mary entered the room carrying a small basket of food. "Eat well," she said kindly. "You will need strength for the journey ahead. The mountains can be dangerous, and even a short walk can be tiring after days in the storm." The sisters nodded gratefully and began eating, savoring the warmth of the meal and the comforting presence of the settlers. For the first time in weeks, They felt nourished not only in body but in spirit. After breakfast, John gathered the sisters and gave them supplies for the journey. He handed them sturdy cloaks, warm blankets, and small packs of food and water. Maria and Lela accepted them with quiet gratitude, feeling the weight of responsibility and the importance of every item. John spoke carefully, his eyes serious. "Follow the paths we marked. Be cautious, step carefully, and watch for signs of danger. The mountains are beautiful, but they are also unforgiving. Keep your wits about you and trust your skills. Remember what you have learned." Maria nodded firmly. She had absorbed every lesson, every warning, and every piece of advice. She knew that survival was not about rushing or reckless bravery. It was about observation, careful planning, and courage. Lela, though younger and smaller, felt a surge of confidence. She had faced fear before, and now she knew she could move forward with strength and awareness. They hugged the settlers, thanking them for their care and guidance. Tears glistened in their eyes, but their hearts were filled with determination. The sisters stepped out into the crisp morning air. The snow under their feet crunched with every step, and the cold bit at their cheeks, but it also reminded them that they were alive. Maria took the lead, scanning the mountains for the path John had pointed out. Lela followed closely, her eyes alert and her senses sharp. Every movement mattered, every step could be dangerous, but the sisters felt ready. They had learned to read the land, observe signs, and prepare for unexpected challenges. As they walked, Maria noticed animal tracks in the snow. Wolves had passed through recently, and she remembered John's lessons about staying alert. She whispered to Lela, "Do not panic, stay calm. We will move carefully and avoid them if possible." Lela nodded, feeling her heart race but trusting her sister's guidance. They moved slowly, deliberately, avoiding areas where the snow was thin or the ground unstable. Every decision mattered, and every step reinforced their confidence. The mountains seemed endless, but the sisters pressed on. They remembered the kindness of the settlers and the lessons they had learned, which gave them courage. Along the path, they encountered small challenges, patches of ice, hidden streams, and deep snowdrifts. Maria carefully tested each step, ensuring it was safe before continuing. Lela followed, learning to trust her instincts and her sister's judgment. The sisters had become skilled in survival, combining courage with careful observation. As the day wore on, they took breaks in small clearings, huddling together for warmth and drinking water from melted snow. They shared small pieces of food from their packs, savoring every bite. Maria spoke softly to Lela, "We have come far, sister. The mountains are difficult, but we are strong. We will find our family. We must believe." Lela smiled faintly, feeling hope and determination growing in her heart. The mountains were still cold and harsh, but they no longer seemed impossible. Late in the afternoon, the sisters came to a ridge overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking. Snow-covered trees stretched as far as the eye could see, and the sun reflected off the icy ground, creating a sparkling landscape. But Maria's eyes were not on the beauty. They were searching for signs of people, for tracks, and for any clues that might lead them to their family. Lela scanned the valley as well, her small hands shading her eyes from the sunlight. Suddenly they spotted faint tracks in the snow, footprints that were not theirs. Maria's heart leapt. "Lela, look, these tracks, someone has passed here recently. We must follow them carefully." Lela nodded, her excitement mixing with caution. They moved slowly down the slope, following the footprints and staying alert. Every sound, the crunch of snow, the whisper of the wind, was amplified in the silence of the mountains. The sisters knew they were close, but they also knew they could not rush. Careful steps were necessary to stay safe. As they descended into the valley, the footprints led them to a small clearing where smoke curled from a distant cabin. Maria felt her heart race. Could this be it? Could they finally be near their family? They approached cautiously, staying hidden among the trees at first to observe. They saw a group of people moving about the cabin, tending to firewood and gathering food. Their clothing and actions looked familiar. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Lela," she whispered, "I think we have found them, our family." Lela's small hand grasped her sister's tightly. Her heart pounded with excitement and fear. She had waited so long to see them again, and now they were near. The sisters moved slowly and quietly, careful not to alarm anyone until they were close enough. Maria spoke softly. "We must approach carefully. We cannot be reckless, but we must make our presence known soon." Lela nodded, understanding the delicate balance between caution and action. As they stepped into the clearing, the family noticed them immediately. Shouts of recognition rang out, and a mixture of joy and relief filled the air. Parents and siblings ran toward the sisters, embracing them tightly. Maria and Lela felt the warmth of their family's arms, the reassurance of familiar voices, and the comfort of home after so many days of hardship. Tears streamed down all their faces as they held each other, finally reunited after weeks of fear and struggle. The family led the sisters inside the cabin, offering food, blankets, and warm tea. Maria and Lela felt safe at last, surrounded by love and care. They shared the story of their journey, the snowstorm, the mountains, and the strangers who had saved them. Their family listened in awe and gratitude, amazed at the courage and resilience the sisters had shown. The kindness of the settlers had given them the chance to survive, and now that survival led them back to the warmth of their family. That night, as the sisters lay beside their siblings, Maria whispered to Lela, "We have been through so much, but we are together again. The mountains were harsh, but they taught us courage, patience, and trust. We survived because we never gave up." Lela nodded, feeling the truth of her sister's words. She knew they had grown stronger through the trials, and that strength would remain with them forever. In the days that followed, the sisters shared their experiences with their family. They spoke of the snowstorms, the dangers of the mountains, and the lessons they had learned from the settlers. The family marveled at their bravery and the wisdom they had gained. Maria and Lela also spoke of the kindness they had received, reminding everyone that even strangers could offer help in times of need. The story became a lesson in courage, trust, and the power of human compassion. Though the journey had been difficult, Maria and Lela knew it had changed them. They had faced the cold, hunger, and fear, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The mountains had tested their spirit, but they had survived, guided by courage, careful planning, and the support of those who showed kindness. The sisters realized that life was fragile, yet full of opportunities for hope, and that trust and compassion could overcome even the harshest challenges. In the end, Maria and Lela stayed with their family, safe and cared for, but the lessons of the journey stayed with them forever. They had discovered the strength within themselves, the value of guidance, and the importance of kindness in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable. The memory of the settlers who had saved them remained vivid, a reminder that courage and compassion could create miracles, even in the coldest and most unforgiving places. The mountains outside were still white and vast, but for Maria and Lela, they were no longer a place of fear. They were a testament to survival, courage, and the enduring power of hope. And as they sat with their family, safe and warm, they knew that no storm, no snow, and no challenge could ever take away the lessons they had learned or the strength they had discovered within themselves.